I'm Jace Lacob, and you're listening to Masterpiece Studio. Life at Scaledale House always keeps its residents on their toes. Whether it's an emergency farm call-out, goats running wild, or just Siegfried being Siegfried. But today, the excitement revolves around the arrival of James's newest veterinary student, Richard Carmody.
Mr. Carmody, I presume.
You presume right.
Final year RBC?
Yes, specialising in equine science.
Standards must be slipping.
I'm not sure I understand.
You were late.
I was not. I arrived in Derby an hour ahead of schedule, only to discover the street signs had been removed to discourage enemy invaders. It took a little extra time to locate Scaledale House through no fault of my own, and yet I arrived at 3 sharp, as arranged with Mr. Harriet.
I stand corrected. Farnham, Siegfried, don't ask.
It's a pleasure, sir.
It becomes very apparent very soon that while Richard has exceptional academic knowledge, his interpersonal skills are lacking.
Keep mother and calf quarantined. Disinfect regularly top to bottom. Your best chance is to stop the spread.
Why did it start in the first place?
Was the new calf a recent addition?
No, we bought her in calf a few weeks back.
She was probably already infected. And she hasn't grazed with the others.
Aye, of course.
Schoolboy error.
I beg your pardon?
Any farmer worth his salt knows to keep a new beast separate.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry, Mr. Carmody's rather new to this. He doesn't mean to be rude.
With Tristan gone and James leaving for training, the veterinary practice needs Richard to succeed. But his greatest challenge yet isn't the animals or even the owners.
You told Mr. Farnan that you couldn't get behind the wheel again. This won't do at all.
Yes, but
With Mr. Harriet gone, you need to pull your weight. So I'm going to give you a driving lesson.
I'm not sure that's a good idea. I can't drive a Rolls Royce.
You're in at the deep end, dear boy. That's the only thing for it.
Will Richard rise to the occasion? Actor James Anthony Rose joins us to share how he approached playing the smart and particular Richard Carmody and what he shares with his character both on and off the set. And this week we are joined by All Creatures Great and Small star James Anthony Rose. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chase.
So you're coming into an established production in its 4th series, which can be daunting even for a veteran actor. What was the atmosphere like on set on your first day, and how did the cast of All Creatures welcome you?
With open arms, I can quite genuinely say it's a real family unit that exists in the world of All Creatures, both on and off screen. I know that sounds perhaps a bit corny to say, but it is genuinely true in this instance. And so I was incredibly lucky to find myself being very, very quickly osmosed into this group. It's such a team effort. The costume and makeup people are the first people you usually meet, and so they were incredibly welcoming and very encouraging. And then that continued into the cast and the producers and the writers, everyone involved. So it was an incredibly warm atmosphere to be welcomed into. And I felt very supported by everybody.
Most television shows are shot entirely out of order, leading actors to have to keep track of their character arcs and emotional beats. But I am curious here, what was the first scene you shot for All Creatures Great and Small, and what went through your mind when Stuart yelled action?
I believe that my first scene, if I remember it correctly, was with Sam and Anna as Siegfried and Mrs. Hall in the kitchen, sat around the kitchen table. I was sort of thrown in at the deep end, and my whole sort of start in this series was a baptism of fire, really, because for various scheduling reasons we had to shoot it out of chronological order. So it wasn't the first scene that you see me in. It was actually a bit further along into Carmody's storyline. But something about sitting at that table with the lovely faces of Sam and Anna. Yeah, it was strange because I had to be sort of settled in by that point because Carmody had sort of been a little bit established. So I did sort of have to sort of jump ahead, but I felt completely safe, taking that jump, that leap of faith. You sort of have to take that leap as an actor and hope that it lands. But that adrenaline rush that's what you feel, I think, when you hear the word action. You just go for it.
Yeah, but my God, what a first day. I mean, that's amazing. Richard, despite being a very knowledgeable vet, is still rather unsure around actual animals. And there's a discomfort or unease to him in those scenes at times. What sort of hands-on research did you receive ahead of time? And did it help at all to walk that fine line of knowledge without experience when playing Richard?
Yeah, I mean, the production put me in touch with Andy Barrett, who's the on-set vet consultant, and who actually worked with Alf White and Donald Sinclair as well, the character that Siegfried is based on. So Andy took me around a farm, and I met a couple of horses and a cow and some calves, and we listened to their heartbeat. So yeah, in that sense, I was getting the basics insofar as what a vet needs to know with regards to how to use a stethoscope and things like that. But I thought it was important as well, though, that I sort of learned that and then unlearned it almost for playing Carmody, as he's practically not very good. He doesn't really sort of hold his stethoscope in the right way, and he has to look a bit clumsy at first. But I was also conscious of making sure that I didn't make the animals feel uncomfortable around me, because it was important that we work within safe parameters and that they didn't feel uneasy around this strange person who clearly didn't know what they were doing.
I love that notion, though, of learning and then unlearning. Richard Carmody brings an entirely different energy to Skeldale House, especially in the wake of the departure of Tristan. He's literal, he's serious, he's entirely out of his element at times in the real world, often in a world of his own. What's your take on Richard Carmody as a character? What makes him tick?
I'd say he's very driven and very determined. When we first meet him, he is keen to impress. I think he's grown up being top of the class, I think, and has really only thrived in sort of education contexts, being at a boarding school. And yeah, he's kind of like a precision tool in that sense. But it's all very learnt, and so he sticks to that lane, and he's set on this one track of, I am going to know everything I need to know about this field, veterinary practice specifically. He specialises in equine science, so horses are his main thing. He would have you believe anyway. So it's this thing of, at first maybe seeming like there isn't much to teach him, and is very self-assured, but as we know, people who perhaps come across that way on the surface actually are a little insecure, or incredibly perhaps insecure in themselves. And it's a kind of armor that he wears, I think, to protect himself from the things that I think he feels not so sure about, like his interpersonal skills and, making a connection with people. And that is part of his sort of journey in this series, is him beginning to sort of let that mask, that front of being very kind of academic and that being all that there is to him, but actually, knowing that he does have a heart and that there is a person under all of that to warm to and to get to know. And so it was lovely, really nice thing as an actor to play both those things. You're always thinking about, subtext and what's really going on underneath.
There's a lot of humor in All Creatures, but a lot of that humor often goes straight over Richard's head. He's often unsure how to act or interact with people, such as in episode 4's egg scene. I'm wondering how you approach that aspect of his character. Did you see Carmody as being at all what we might today call being on the spectrum or neurodivergent?
Yeah, I think there probably is. Yeah, it could be said that he may be on the spectrum, and if people who are watch it and identify with Carmody, then that is, I think, really good, because he faces these things that he finds challenging and he doesn't let them define him, and they're just part of his character. He does find things difficult, but through people's support, he gets through it and builds relationships through that without really sort of intending to or realizing that he has. So that's, I think, really a touching thing to see.
James offers Richard a piece of advice on his first day.
The animals are the easy part, of course. It's the people who cause all the bother.
and Richard looks rather dubiously at James. I mean, what does he make of James initially, or indeed of anyone who believes that they have something to teach him?
I think he sees in James something that he sort of greatly admires, but knows that he can't really sort of adopt, because James has got this way with talking to people. And I think Carmody is probably a little bit bemused at first by that ability, and maybe doesn't see it as relevant to his work. But I think there's a great respect there that I don't think he really quite knows what to deal with. Maybe not being threatened by it, but I think someone like James kind of fascinates him.
Upon his arrival, Richard comes face to face with Mrs. Pumphrey at Scaledale House. She's intimidating, but he's not intimidated by her at all. In fact, he's rather brusque with her, rather blunt.
My community tea party's just around the corner. The aim is to raise everyone's spirits, not bombard them with noxious gas.
Perhaps one could keep the dog outside.
Banish him from the bosom of his foster family. Oh, I couldn't countenance such cruelty.
Do you always treat your animals like people?
Does he view Mrs. Pumphrey as ridiculous or even outrightly absurd in her treatment of Cedric or Tricky?
Yeah, I think, again, it's something that he wasn't expecting to find. I don't think he's ever really come across someone like Mrs. Pumphrey. Something that Stuart, the director, and I discussed early on was there isn't always a sort of, he's not emoting things when he's delivering those lines of, questioning Mrs. Pumphrey about, do you always treat your animals like people? He's not sort of trying to be rude. He genuinely is just curious almost, but he doesn't realize how that he's coming across as, a bit blunt. So it's that funny thing of him just sort of going into every situation without putting any sort of angle on it, almost, that he is, it just is, was the thing that we'd say about Carmody a lot of the time. It just is.
It just is. We're only given little teases of Richard's home life before now. His parents, where we learn, are often abroad. He says he was sent to boarding school and then college. But what sort of home life do you think he had? And is his lack of connection to people perhaps based around a lack of parental or familial warmth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that he doesn't really know any other world except the world of school. And I think, his family life, there's an absence there. If he's been off to boarding school for that length of time, he won't have been around his family. And so there is something lacking there. There isn't that connection with his parents. So I don't think that he grew up in the most sort of warm family home, and that's all he knows. So he's just sort of, I think, accepted it, and only now that he's being able to compare his family life with this newfound family, it's suddenly, all of that, so I think, starts to sort of come to the surface a lot more.
I love Richard and Siegfried's rapport, and to me it's the scene in the car after the Chapman's farm visit that clinches that dynamic.
Our new PM believes suffering lies ahead. That suffering will be greater if we cannot feed the country.
True.
I intend to serve by doing my duty to our farmers. We're a reserved occupation for a reason.
Indeed we are.
Is that Richard's entire raison d'etre?
Yeah, I think he, like I say, he's committed to this idea, and once he's decided that is the way forward, it's very hard to sort of move him from that. And I find that it's a very touching moment, because I think he kind of knows probably that he wouldn't last 5 minutes in the army. He's not soldier material. And so I think in that sense, he knows his limitations to some extent. He knows that he is just going to best serve as a vet and to support the farmers and make sure that the country is fed. And he sees that as his responsibility.
Before this next question, a brief word from our sponsors. Ocean voyages, expeditions, river journeys, Viking is dedicated to bringing travelers closer to the destination, offering a small ship experience and a shore excursion in every port. Learn more at Viking.com. One of the elements of this series that I love most is one that you keep bringing up, and it's the fact that Scaledale House is very much a found family. Richard begins on the outside, but over the course of these 5 episodes, he does find his place within this family. And he allows himself to be taught and to be humbled, sometimes quite literally dumped in the muck. And Richard might be a swat, but he's a lovable swat. Is it a case of Richard just having to be put through his paces?
Largely, I think that's his trajectory early on, is having to be sort of taught these lessons, because I think that's how he best learns. And I could definitely connect with that, is that thing of learning on the job and the practical approach and learning through experience. Yeah, so it's definitely, I think, a case of him knowing that he's sort of confronted those challenges and learning from his mistakes.
And his mannerisms, especially the bow tie, mark him as an interloper. Where did the idea for the bow tie come from, and how does it help to signify Richard's identity as an outsider in the Dales?
Yeah, I love that he wears a bow tie. It really kind of encompasses his sort of slight quirkiness and eccentricity. And it was actually at the costume fitting, at my costume fitting, and Ross, the costume designer, Ross Little, suggested it and thought, I don't know if it's too much. And I said, no, it's not too much. He's going to wear a bow tie. And from that point on, it was decided that was going to be one of his, his trademarks. I wanted him to have that slight sort of oddness about him, but sort of oblivious oddness. And there's something a bow tie in amongst everybody else that he does stick out like a bit of a sore thumb. He just sort of carries on regardless. That sort of naivety is a really nice thing to play as well. And I think the best kind of comedy, I think, comes from people who don't realize that they're coming across as funny.
But I think it's also rooted in this very sort of human foible of his, that he shows up to a farm in flannels and a smart hat. He's wearing these spotless clothes, and there is this sense that pride goeth before the fall and all that. But that it's almost part and parcel of who Richard Carmody is, that he needs to be polished and perfect at all times. And I think it's very fitting that he would show up, given his naivete, in a bow tie, in a smart hat, in spotless clothes, no protective gear.
Yeah. It's almost like he's, I don't know, kind of compensating for something. It is that, I think it's sort of that thing of all the gear, no idea, a little bit. He's got the best sort of Wellington boots that are spotless, and that comes from the books, I think. And James asks, haven't you got any protective clothing? We're going to be on the farms, and Carmody says, oh no, I'm sure I'll be all right. I'm sure we're not going to be here long. And so all of that plays into his character.
But he does get divine punishment in that scene in the form of a cowpat, and his pristine suit is just destroyed. What was filming the scene like, and what was that muck made up of?
It was, I think, largely made up of Weetabix, I was told, and maybe some chocolate was thrown in there as well. Either it was definitely, I think, yes, sort of edible stuff, maybe some sort of oats. And it was funny because over the course of filming the stuff at the crab trees in that field, there was a herd of cows over the other side of the field, and I think they got a whiff of these oats and things that had been mixed up on the other side of the field, and gradually over the course of the day they would sort of edge ever closer towards this patch, and then they would have to be sort of shooed away. And then of course once it got on me, I became a walking target, so I could happily sort of throw my face in it without fear of getting any sort of nasty infection.
You could eat it for breakfast, I guess.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
And I love Siegfried's dressing down of Richard. Our role is to support, not scold, and also to refrain from throwing oneself in manure, if at all possible. But he's not sacked. We just need you to gin up on people for a change. What lesson does Richard learn here, do you think?
His whole approach up until that point has been about facts and delivering those facts. And it's something that it doesn't come naturally to him to be able to just talk to people face to face and be reassuring, but it pays in dividends by the end. He, again, he realizes that if he looks to the owner, the answers will come. And it's a self-confidence thing to be able to not have to refer to his books, but to be able to just talk face to face with the owner. And through that dialogue, he will find the cause of the problem, which is, as people see in the series, something that becomes apparent.
It's Carmody's textbook knowledge that serves to connect the Crabtree's brucellosis case with a risk to Helen's pregnancy, and he offers up a rather elegant solution to testing. Does Richard feel somewhat vindicated by the power of knowledge after putting his foot in it earlier with his bluntness?
Oh, yeah. There definitely is, an I was right kind of big tick for me sort of feeling. When he brings that knowledge and his sort of his new found research that he brings into the mix, and his sort of very academic sort of obsession with studies, with different case studies, and but that can't be the whole. It's a balancing act that he has to realize that yes, that plays a part, but it can't just be the part that he plays in the family unit, of the working family at least, is to bring that side of him, but it is only just a side. And to make him a fully formed vet, he has to have everything else that James has, which is the human connection.
James also has another skill that Richard doesn't have, which is the fact that Richard can't drive. A skill he's going to need if he's going to be a veterinarian in the Dales. And episode 5 opens with James trying to teach him, only to be overtaken on the road by the tractor. The books made it sound so simple, which is the most Carmody thing ever said. And later he nearly crashes Siegfried's car. Is it true that you can't drive in real life either?
It is true. Yes, that was very much art imitating life, or to have that thrown in. I don't know if the writers knew that I couldn't drive and worked that into the storyline. I think they probably made their lives harder by adding in that, because I, of course, am seen to be driving, but of course it's all done on low loaders, and all the other shots where I seem to be driving is with a driving double. So I had no prior experience of being behind the wheel or driving a car. I'd always maintained that I couldn't trust myself in a car. But having said that, I have since tried my hand at it and have had. I'm in currently getting lessons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I have. It's actually finally sort of not forced me, but I thought, well, I'll give it a go, because I think it's probably just a good skill to have as an actor.
But it's almost like Richard's struggle has maybe given you drive to
yes.
learn.
Yeah.
James takes Richard to Mrs. Pumphrey, where he examines Tricky Woo, and he tries to win Mrs. P over, but it doesn't go according to plan. And Richard realizes that James is nervous about going to war, but James says he's nervous about what he's leaving behind. He needs this arrangement to work. What does this admission mean to Richard about what's riding on this?
I think he recognizes that he needs to step up, that he can't be just the meek little assistant that is advising on the facts or so on. He's really got to, get fully involved and, be very hands-on. And that I think puts a sort of fire under him. And I think he really does sort of throw himself into that role of taking that responsibility. And I don't think he wants to let James down either. He sees the great work that James has done, and so I think he just wants to try and sort of carry that on, and for James to be proud. And I think it's a very touching thing to see Carmody really try and it's a different kind of wanting to impress. It's not about showing off. It's about genuinely sort of doing a good job of carrying on the work that James has been doing. He's greatly inspired by seeing James and Siegfried. They're the real deal, I think, in his eyes. And yeah, he comes to realize that what they have is definitely required of you if you want to be a good vet. And he desperately wants to be a good vet. So he listens and he learns, and so he takes up that baton.
And then he does show Mrs. P some deference. He shows Tricky some affection. He realizes it's Tricky's new shampoo that's causing his skin irritation. And he turns over this new leaf. But having said that, I love that it's not Siegfried, it's not James, but it's Mrs. Pumphrey who ends up teaching Richard how to drive after he's exhausted the other's patience. And these two are not on the best of terms before this. She can't even seem to get his name right half the time. But the scenes in the Rolls Royce here end up being some of my favorite of the entire series. How fun were these scenes to film?
They were great. I mean, to be sat behind the wheel of a Rolls Royce with Tricky to my left it's just such a wonderful set piece, and having Francois in the back as well. That sort of, it's such a kind of motley crew that you see gathered, and so, and like I say, it's that the rabbit in the headlightsness of me sat behind the wheel, not really knowing what I'm doing. I didn't really have to act some of that because I genuinely thought, well, if they ask me to drive this thing, even just out of the courtyard, I just would have been sweating buckets. So there's something very funny about seeing someone who's sort of quite flustered, and I think that is something that I found appealing to play as Carmody, as someone who's getting a little bit sort of is a bit uptight and cross and irritable because they're feeling very uncomfortable and they're being put in the hot seat, literally. But the way that Mrs. Pumphrey is just so kind of now come on, just keep it together. That was a really fun thing to film, and we were all looking forward to doing it.
Mrs. Pumphrey also has a lot at stake with Richard. She needs him to work out as a vet while James is away. But unlike Siegfried and James, she teaches Richard to drive by using a kinder, softer approach, and Tricky, of course. Do you see this scene as a metaphor for what will ultimately help Richard rise to the occasion? That there is value in the kinder approach, and that animals and their owners can teach the vets a thing or two?
That's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, I think that's a lovely metaphor. That, if he carries on in this way, that he will see that it does work, and that ultimately I think he's probably happier for it as well. That he's able to sort of let go a bit more, and to just to know that he doesn't have to sort of have all the answers, that it's not a test, that he is there to do good work. And if he does that with the right approach of a kindness and I think a patience with himself as well, then that will be very rewarding and fulfilling. And I don't think he was expecting to discover any of that.
You end up in scenes this series alongside cows, horses, tortoises, dogs, and cats, among many other creatures, great and small. Which animal co-star was your favorite?
The tortoise Bernard was the first animal that I treated in the examination room.
He may have given you fleas, but...
Yeah, exactly. He may have done, but something of him rubbed off on me, definitely. Yeah, I felt a certain affinity with Bernard because I guess it was the tortoise coming out of its shell and going at its own pace. I think Richard could relate to, and I certainly could, coming into this new working environment. And so I remember that scene very fondly. So I think if I had to pick one, I'd go with Bernard the tortoise.
I love that. So there are 2 episodes left of All Creatures Great and Small. What can you tease about what's coming up for Richard Carmody?
Well, he now has sort of, is settling into the new setup at Skeldale. So he kind of is able to start to sort of, I think, build up a bit more of a kind of routine, the day-to-day goings on. And now that he's established himself, I think he's able to maybe take a bit more of a back seat, not in the car, but he'll, I think he's does everything with such a kind of serious determination and sort of quietly getting on with his tasks. But also, of course, he is starting to find that there is a place for him at the dinner table at Skeldale as well. And so I think his development in the family dynamic and having little run-ins with Siegfried as well, of course, to keep him on his toes. So yeah, many of the same things, that he's come to be known for in the goings on at Skeldale House.
Knowledge, fleas, and family. As Siegfried says. James Anthony Rose, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Next time, the action continues to escalate as we reach the end of Season 4 of Miss Scarlet and the Duke.
Has Mr. Nash ever mentioned the name Eamon before?
Her boss is a suspect. Talk about conflict of interest.
Patrick Nash is many things, but he's not a murderer.
Maybe not. But he was looking for someone right before they were killed. And he was seen by their dead body, and then he disappeared.
He hasn't disappeared.
He's not at home, he's not at work, or any of his usual haunts. So where is he then?
Join us next Sunday as we sit down with writers and spouses, Rachel New and Ben Edwards, as we discuss the season finale of Miss Scarlet and the Duke. Masterpiece Studio is hosted by me, Jay Slay Cobb, produced by Jack Pombriant, and edited by Robin Bissett. Alishaba Etup is our sound designer. The executive producer for Masterpiece is Suzanne Simpson.